Hi, Julie Jones from SSB Performance, Smarter, Stronger, Better Mindset Training, here with this week's Mindset Made Simple Tip of the Week, brought to you by Game Day Sportswear. This week we're talking about you must do this to be successful, or you must be this to be successful. I was with friends yesterday, and one of our friends has a son who's a really good wrestler, and his mother often says, he's just not intense enough. If he would only be more intense. And how many times have you heard this? He needs to be more intense. Or one of my clients who was a junior national champion in a long jump, his coaches have always told him that he needs to sit down, he needs to stop pacing and just chill. We often try to get those we lead to act in different ways, to behave differently. And sure, there are times when people need to behave differently. But the question here is, how often are we asking people to behave differently and then asking them to make changes that are going to affect their performance adversely? You know how you perform well, and maybe they're too young, or maybe they can't see, or maybe they're a little blind to things that will help them perform better. But I find more often the trap that we fall into is that we think there's a prototype of someone who plays this position, and this kid needs to act like that. They need to talk more. They need to be whatever, I don't know, more intense in this way. And maybe that's just not in them. I have a couple examples. My sister was a flight attendant for a long time, and she never wanted to work first class because she didn't want to give the safety speech. And if you work in first class, you have to get on the microphone and you stand there, and first class people are staring at you, and people in the back of the cabin can sort of see you. No one's paying attention. But nonetheless, she didn't want to do that. She didn't want all eyes on her. She didn't want anything that had to do with a microphone. I, on the other hand, would have been on the microphone very vehemently giving instructions, telling everybody what they were supposed to do in case of an evacuation. Whatever it would, that's who I am. I enjoy speaking with people. I enjoy speaking to people. I enjoy giving directions. That's what coaches do. Two different personalities, two different strengths. If she was in that position, she was not performing at her best. If I'm in that position, I have a chance of performing better because I like to do it. It's part of my personality. I think back to our shortstop at Cleveland State the last year that we were there, one of the best kids that I've ever coached. Her name's Krista. And I remember my assistant saying, Krista needs to talk more, or this or that or whatever. We thought, okay, Krista needs to be more vocal. And then we stopped and thought about it. Do we need Krista to be more vocal, or do we need Krista to be comfortable? Because do we want a vocal shortstop, or do we want the best shortstop? And the best shortstop in this case was not going to be Krista being vocal. It was going to be Krista being focused and analyzing and doing all the things that Krista did oh so well. So we backed off of Krista talking. It wasn't that big of a deal. She talked when she needed to, but she wasn't going to be the rah-rah, middle of the field, cheerleader, pumping up the pitcher and all those kinds of things. Somebody else had to do it. Think about this. There are kids who can play shortstop, and there are kids who can play third base. And part of it is talent-based or skill-based, but part of it is mental. Because at shortstop, it takes longer for the ball to get to you. So you have more time to think, and maybe you work well in that situation. But at third base, man, it's either you get it or you don't. It's overdone. And if you move a third baseman to shortstop, they've got all day now in their mind. It's probably seconds or parts of a second difference, but they think they have more time, and now it doesn't fit their personality. It doesn't fit their skill set. So the point of it is that we have ideas of what people should be. I wish my son showed a little bit more competitiveness in some ways. He'll either get there or he won't. Or maybe the way that he swims now is going to be perfectly fine for his success. Hard to tell. But if I force him to do something, he's not going to like it. He's not going to like swimming anymore, and he's not probably going to want to participate. So mom has to sit in the stands and cheer quietly, or just keep my ideas to myself. That doesn't mean we don't get people to change. I'm not saying that. But there have been times that you've thought these things and we've gotten people out of their comfort zone. Sports psychologist John Sullivan says athletes are not just bodies, they are bodies with minds. And there is a distinct relationship between personality and performance. And sometimes we need to be well aware of what keeps people in their zone and what takes people out of it. If you read the book Quiet, The Power of Introverts in a World That Can't Stop Talking, the author Susan Cain emphasizes that introverts get their motivation or they add to the team dynamic in different ways because they can sit back and listen and analyze. And that's exactly what Krista did. While the rest of us were losing our heads, Krista was able to analyze, gather information, and put it into practice. Had I had her turning around and making all kinds of noise and directing all kinds of traffic, she wouldn't have been analyzing, which would have taken her out of her strength, which was looking at every little thing, looking at exactly what she needed to do to get a jump, to get an advantage, and then making the play, which is ultimately what we all want. So what are we doing? Are we allowing people to play to their strengths? Because we know that we play to our strengths, we're going to be better. Or are we enforcing some, thing that we think is going to make a difference? You have to be more intense. You have to be rah, right? I don't know if that's the case for every kid. We need to understand that sometimes there are differences. With my athlete, who is the opposite of Krista, who talks, his coaches or all the people around him think that he needs to sit in between jumps. When in all reality, some of the best jumps he's had have come when he's come off the track from his warm-up, walked right up to get ready to jump, and then goes. So there's no thinking involved. He just gets up. There's no time to sit and think. He's burned off some extra energy, which he probably needs to do. He's not sitting there running 1,000 thoughts in his head, and he's ready to go. So the question is, how do we determine who needs what, but where do we back off and say, just because I would have done it this way doesn't mean that he or she needs to do it that way. And really, some of that is the art of coaching, if you think about it. But it's keeping people in their comfort zone. And when I say comfort zone for this discussion, we're talking where they're comfortable perform. Not that we're not pushing them out of their comfort zone to do more, is that we're allowing them to follow their process, because when we add in these expectations, they sometimes overwhelm the process. And now if Krista's talking, she's not thinking about when she should be getting her jump. She's not thinking about receiving direction. She's not thinking about all the things that give her her edge. And my track guy, he is thinking too much. He can't get out of his head. Now he's overanalyzing instead of going through motions or standing up and pacing as he wants to do and sort of burning that off, having conversations. He is locked in, analyzing what his competition is doing. He's small, so he's not using his big body posture, because when we sit and wait and we're sitting like this, we are, lowering our testosterone, increasing our cortisol. He's not up and in his motion, which is important to him. Dr. Carl Jung, you might know of him and his study of personality, talks about how these personality differences affect our behavior. For instance, extroverts draw energy from external interactions, and introverts recharge in solitary moments. So Krista could go back, take a deep breath, do what she needed to do, and come back. While the rest of us were out cheering and yelling how many outs there are and all those kinds of things, if she had to do that, she wasn't going to be focused. And more than anything, we needed her to be at her best. So if Krista's not going to talk, Krista's not going to talk. She will say, cut, do all the things she needs to do in the heat of plays. But if she's not cheering everybody on and being the number one cheerleader, okay. Now, on the other side, if Dan is not able to burn off some steam, he isn't going to be comfortable at all. He is drawing, he's an extrovert, he is drawing energy from everything around him. And that helps him be his best, most explosive. And that's what we want from him. So figuring these things out. Last example is this. My assistant wanted decisions now. I, on the other hand, needed 48 hours to figure things out. When I used her mode of decision making and I went with a hot head or not all the information, I usually wasn't at my best. Now, clearly, as a head coach, sometimes you have to make decisions just like that. That comes with the territory. In games and things like that, of course, we're going to make a decision because we have all the information, or we're making the best decision with the information we have. But in other instances, I was much better following my meticulous, looking at all the variables, looking at all the consequences, positive and negative, and then coming back with a more tempered approach and giving my decision. When we work out of our comfort, we're not always our best. Our goal as leaders is to get people to focus on their process, whatever that process is. If we are trying to alter their behavior because we think that's what they need, we may be overwhelming their process. And now they're not focused on their pre-performance routine. They're not thinking about taking their breath. They're not scanning and sniping. They are literally talking about the fact that coach said I need to do this, and coach said I need to do this, and coach said I need to do that. So they're not focusing on what is going to actually help them do the job that we need. So we need to be careful. That's all I'm suggesting. We need to be careful when we say he needs to be more intense. How can we make him more intense? If I send him to you, can you make him more intense? Or maybe he needs to play for a more intense coach because that'll fire him up. Not necessarily. All you have to do is look around at champions and see that there are a million ways to win. And not all of us are wired to be the hype man. Some of us are that calm that keeps everything moving straight along. And we work best in that tempo, and that's okay. But as coaches, it's our job to figure out what those things are and ensure that we are allowing people to find ways to be present and to focus on what's important now, not on what it should be, but on what it is. To gather information at the speed at which they do it, even though the rest of us might be having a heart attack and checking to see if they have a pulse, or trying to pull people down off the wall. Either way, we want them to fire on all cylinders, no matter how many cylinders are in them. So for this week, think about who on your team that you lead, are you imposing how you would do it on them, or what you think the last kid did, so this is what they should do. Because this is something that is rarely discussed, but very important in getting people to perform at their peak. We know that we're better when we're comfortable, whatever comfort looks like. Does that mean we don't push people? Of course not. Does that mean we don't ask people to make changes? Of course not. What we're trying to do is set people up to be their best. And who better to help them do that than those of us who get to watch them every day and say, you know what, if you made this little adjustment, if we want them to change, maybe we give it to them in bite-sized portions, so that they can make one little adjustment and it doesn't feel like it's so overwhelming. So just a thought for the week. I hope that it makes you think about your kids maybe, because that's the hardest thing for me, is watching my kid, because he is not me. And that's sometimes hard to separate apart. But the people that you lead, what do they really need? Where do they need to be on that inverted U of arousal? Because your place on that inverted U is very different than mine, and that's okay. If you'd like to talk about any of these things, give me a shout, juliej@ssbperformance.com. I'd love to dive into the things that can help your team perform at their peak. Until next week, think about who you need to allow some space and who you do need to move out of the zone a little bit, piece by piece or step by step. And until next week, have a great week.